Now in this video, I'll show you how to create a new entity to the program. We're going to create an aircraft class to be represented in the database. This includes creating an interface for the aircraft, defining the aircraft, changing existing models that will use this aircraft, specifically pilot, creating a map for the aircraft, that way entityframework can add it to our database, modifying the database context to include aircrafts, changing the multiplicity map to include aircrafts, creating a repo pattern for the aircraft, and finally testing the repo pattern with some tests. So first things first is creating the interface for our aircraft. What we can do is that we can go over to models and we can see that we have all of our models so far. We'll just go ahead and create a new folder. We can call it aircraft. Let's do a lowercase c, craft model. And we're going to add two files to that. One of them will just be a class called aircraft. Just like how we have flight. And we'll create another one that is called aircraft. And that's going to be our interface class. So as you can see, it already fills up some information for us, specifically the namespace that we're in and the actual class information. We're just going to want to go ahead and specifically say that this is a public interface aircraft. And then we can just start defining the functions and characteristics that every aircraft has, specifically just the characteristics. So every aircraft in our case is going to have a public int aircraft ID, and we specifically tell to set and get. So this is going to be the primary key for our table. And this part right here is essentially just specifying to entityframework that there is a getter and setter, and it's just working with this integer aircraft. And we're going to do the same thing for all of our other member variables, including a public string aircraft name, which we'll also need a getter and setter for. Perfect. And then finally, a public double flight time in hours, which again will have a get and a set. And that's it. That is our interface class for the aircraft. Now we can go ahead and move on to the actual aircraft class. In this case, we're going to go ahead and make it a public class. And it's going to be extending aircraft. And we'll get a little error, but if we go ahead and hit Alt-Enter, we can go ahead and implement the interface. And generally, we actually don't need any of this. So we can go ahead and delete those. But we will still want them to be get and set. And in our case, we're going to say that the default value for flight time in hours is 0. Okay. And then down here, what we'll also implement is a foreign key for our data tables. Specifically, a public string pilot email, because every flight is going to need a pilot in order to fly it, which will have a get and a set. And then lastly, we want the actual pilot. Pilot, which will also be a get and a set. And there we have it. We have our instance or our extended class for aircraft that uses the interface for aircraft that we created just moments ago. So since we have a foreign key to a pilot in our aircraft table, we'll want to go ahead and go over to pilot and create a similar foreign key for aircraft. And in the meantime, I'll also show you a common mistake that we made while creating new entities to add to our project. So we can go ahead and go over to models and find user, pilot. Go ahead and go over to pilot. And I actually started off an example here where I was going to create a public aircraft called aircraft object. But the issue is that it says that aircraft isn't in this namespace, or that the namespace aircraft could not be found. So what's going on here? Basically, what we need to do is that we want to go to aircraft.cs and specifically tell it that we're just looking for, the namespace is just openair.data.models. And this will fix our issue over in aircraft, or I should say over in pilot with aircraft. Now, you'll probably notice that now I'm getting an error here, and that's because we did the same thing here. So we'll want to get rid of that instance there. Go ahead and save it. And if we look over at aircraft, no errors. And if we look over at pilot, suddenly no errors, except for the fact that I didn't finish this aircraft. So if you're ever finding that you're not in the correct namespace, or you've clearly created a class that this program can't find, make sure that you're using the correct namespaces. So let's just go ahead and finish off this aircraft object. We can go ahead and just simply say that it's a get. And then we'll have a public string aircraft ID. That is also a get. And then we're done. We have our foreign key for the pilot that relates it to the aircraft database. And the reason that we only use get in these two cases is because in the pilots table, there's no foreign key needed to get to the aircraft object. So we only ever need to get the aircraft object or the ID from the pilots table. So now that we have our models updated, we can go ahead and start creating an aircraft map for Entity Framework to use in order to create the table in our database. So we can go ahead and go over to model context, which has our context of maps. And as you can see, we have flight map, pilot map, point map, route map. And now we're going to go ahead and add aircraft map. Aircraft map. Now, this will require us using a few more libraries. So we're going to be using Microsoft.entityframework.core.metadata.builders. We're going to be using, let me go ahead and fix that so that it's a capital B. There we go. We're going to be using our openair.data.models in order to be creating these tables. We'll go ahead and add a semicolon there. All right, great. All right, so now we can go ahead and get rid of our namespace portion so we don't come across those errors that we were having last time. We have a public class aircraft map. And then we'll go ahead and add some of the following. So we'll want a private variable for func entity type builder, specifying that we want it to create aircraft, and we'll go ahead and call it entity. Then we'll go ahead and create a function for public, or a constructor class, aircraft map, taking in an entity type builder that is specifically working with aircraft. And we'll go ahead and call it entity builder. And then inside of this function are the rules that we specify to Entity Framework such that it will create this table. And actually, I missed one other library. We're going to also want to be using system.diagnostics.contracts. And you'll see why in a second. So the first thing that we're going to want to do in this constructor is we're going to want to say contract.requires that the entity builder that we're being given does not equal null. If it is null, then the contract will kind of take care of that for us. Otherwise, we say that the entity builder dot has key a dot aircraft ID. So this is ensuring that when we're building our table, every instance of an aircraft has a key called aircraft ID. That has to be there because that is our primary key. Next, we'll go ahead and start creating some more properties for this table, including property. We want to specify that every aircraft, a.aircraft ID. Oh, looks like I definitely spelled that wrong a little bit. There we go. Dot is required. So this ensures that the value is actually set, that there is a PK, and this is ensuring that that value does not equal null. Entity builder. Ooh, I'm spelling a lot of things wrong. There we go. Entity builder dot property. We're going to add one more. A equals a dot, this time flight time in hours is also a required value. Need to have it so that the flight is only going for a certain amount of time. Okay, great. And then we'll just add one more function specifying that public aircraft. Oh, whoopsie. Did not mean to add the parentheses there. There we go. Aircraft map takes a func entity type builder that works with aircraft called entity, and we will specify that this class's entity, this one specifically up here, dot entity, is equal to the entity we were given in this constructor. Great. And that's all we need in order for entity framework to take our class and create some sort of table out of it with these particular values. Next, we'll mosey on over to the multiplicity map to specify that the model builder dot entity aircraft dot has one or preferably we'll go with a dot pilot with one p equals p dot aircraft object. So this is to make sure that the multiplicity of our database is consistent and it's enforced. So every pilot has one aircraft and every aircraft has a single pilot. And if I had to guess why this is freaking out here, I feel like it's because I called it something wrong. P dot aircraft. Ooh, I accidentally called it aircraft in pilot, so that's fine. Let's just go ahead and go over to, oop, that's the pilot map. I want pilot.cs, and I want to change this to aircraft. There we go. And then we go back to our multiplicity map so that we can then do aircraft dot aircraft obj. And there you go. Now our multiplicity map is functional. Next, we'll want to head over to our OpenAir DB context, which can be found in the context map. And we'll want to add a DB set of aircrafts to our database. So we go ahead and we can just go ahead and put it underneath of route points. DB set aircraft. We'll go ahead and call it aircraft. And just like before, we'll do a get and a set, just like the other ones. And then great, this will create an actual table for aircrafts. And then we can go ahead and we can scroll down to the on model creating. And we could specify that when we create the model, we also want it to create a new, not pilot, aircraft map with model builder. Oh, whoopsie. model builder dot entity aircraft, which will go into the aircraft map class that we had created earlier using a specific model builder working with aircrafts. And that's it. Then we just, that's all we have to do for the open air context in order for it to actually add a table specifically for our aircrafts.